Greetings from the very rainy northern slopes near Norwest. You see just behind me the little bit of the view. I'm just standing on a little hill that's not too far from where we live, and you'll see as well of my very kindly donated Den Haag umbrella, which I got from the municipality of The Hague when we visited there the other year. And very kindly gave us a few little presents, one of which was the umbrella, which is coming in quite useful now. So very quick thing really, just wanted to mention is when we are in discussion and debate on social media and in person, but I think particularly these days social media is such a big forum of discussion. I was looking at these chapters in Acts, the book of Acts in the Bible, and Acts 17 specifically, and it talks about a time when Paul is in a place called Athens, and he's discussing and debating. Now, Luke, the doctor, says in verse 21 of that chapter that the Athenians did nothing except debating and discussing all the different ideas. That was kind of their pretty much their sort of full-time occupation, their focus. They were a bit obsessed with it, and we could say today that they spent all their days on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, putting out YouTube videos and having arguments about stuff or discussions. And so Paul comes into that context, and I mean, Paul is a very intelligent guy. He is a very learned guy in Jewish traditions. Would have been very familiar with the scriptures. Very bright chap really. So he's able to engage quite well in academic debate. We see that Peter the Apostle isn't there in Athens. Probably that wasn't his best forum. I don't think Peter would have enjoyed that environment very much, and thankfully it wasn't him having to sort of go in there and have these long and deep philosophical discussions with people. But Paul is somebody who perhaps feels quite comfortable in that kind of territory. So recognising that these situations are for some of us, others of us don't feel that's quite our cup of tea. But Paul goes into the fray. He goes to the synagogue and begins to talk to there's God-fearing Greeks, there's the local Jewish community, and he reasons with them, it says. And then he also goes to the marketplace. Now, the marketplace was a place where different philosophical discussions would take place. So some Epicurean and Stoic philosophers start saying, what's this babbler saying? And he seems to be advocating foreign gods, and what's he on about? And what they do is they bring him to the Areopagus, which is the council, and they say, we want to hear more. And so then it explains in Acts 17 a little bit more detail about what Paul says to them. And then it says something interesting. Some of them sneered when he started talking about resurrection of the dead. So he left the council, and those who were genuinely interested, he then carried on with discussions with them. So what I find interesting about this is he takes the opportunity to enter into both discussion and appropriate kind of interactions within the synagogue, within his own religious community, and he also does that within the marketplace, which is a very much more public setting, very different, very much in the mainstream of Greek culture. And he does things like he refers to one of their poets, and he talks about the altar to the unknown god, which because Athens is full of idols, which he feels quite distressed about. So he takes that particular statue and uses that as a launching pad to draw out a particularly important point about the gospel message that he's preaching. So these are sort of helpful indicators for me about this whole dilemma that we have about how do we use social media in a constructive and helpful way in these days. Um, it feels like it's a very fraught environment at the moment. It feels like it's full of contention and debate and discussion, yes, but sometimes mudslinging, sometimes venom, really, and all sorts of nastiness. And I, I just want to encourage us, and I speak to myself as well. This in the course of using social media, um, we just need wisdom, and we need to perhaps keep on going for ourselves, asking God for wisdom, asking for discernment, and to be constructive in how we use the different mediums of communication that we have. Um, and Galatians 5 talks about what's the what's the what's the way of the flesh, what's the way of the spirit. In other words, what's the way in which we can actually identify whether we're doing things born of the Holy Spirit and in a healthy way, and how can we sometimes identify that it might not be healthy. And it talks in Galatians 5, depending which version you use, but it talks about contentions, factions, a party spirit, um, this kind of whole area of divisiveness, where we sort of end up with, throwing grenades over the top, as it were, to the other side. And there's a lovely, thank you, the rain stopped. That's rather nice, isn't it? Even a little bit of sunshine here. So there we are. Beautiful view there. It's all looking wonderful in Bristol. Um, so one of the things that it comes across with in I think in the Living New Testament, I think that was the version I was looking at. It talks about not being catty, and I thought that was a lovely phrase, really. So my friends have got a cat called Ted, and Ted is uh, a lovely cat, but like all cats, he definitely wants to feel in control of the discussion. He has a number of staff in the house, and so my friend Phil says to him, um, "Go on, do you want to go out, Ted?" And then then Ted knocks on the window, and then he wants to come in, and he just can't make up his mind, or perhaps he just wants to be in control of the in-out situation, and go and play with your friends, Ted. Catch up with your mate, and Ted's like pouring at the window, so he has to go up and open the window and let him in, and then sure enough, 10 minutes later, Ted's thinking, oh no, I need to go out. So anyway, back and forth. So it's quite difficult to kind of um, win the argument with Ted. Ted has always wanted to perhaps have control of the debate about who's in charge here. And of course, from time to time, Ted gets into some pretty catty fights, and has to lick his wounds. Sometimes gets quite hurt from it, and that's a good example. I think we can learn a lot from the teachings of Ted the cat. One thing he's teaching us is um, avoid scratching each other and biting and devouring each other and kind of going after each other. Think about the tone in which we post. Think about the tone in which we comment. Think about whether it's important to respond to that comment or it's not. And I would say also that we probably have to work through, and this is really my prayer at the moment for myself, for other Christian friends, for those in Christian leadership, particularly for all of us. And I think in a wider sense, these things are true for everybody really, is when we put stuff out into the public realm, because everything in social media, depending on your settings obviously, but pretty much you're putting it out there. What am I hoping to achieve from what I'm writing? Okay, so I want to express my view, my thoughts, my reflections, my opinion, my anger, whatever. But what am I hoping to achieve from this? And maybe it's a great day to reflect and say, okay, so the stuff that I've put out on social media recently, maybe over the last few years, maybe in the last few weeks, maybe for us in Bristol, we've had, for those who might be aware, we've had a huge debate over the last week. I can't believe it's just been a week, but over a statue that was toppled down and removed by force by a group of protesters. So that's a big debate, and it's a big city debate, and there's been a lot of discussion for a long time over that particular statue. And of course, that's had a bit of a knock-on effect, a bit of a domino effect, we can say, for a lot of statues around the world. Um, so there's a lot of discussion, and it doesn't mean that we might not think that was a great idea. Okay, so that's fine. There's nothing wrong with thinking, okay, that was a good thing to do, that's the right thing to do, whatever. Okay, and on reflection, we think, oh, it's good. Perhaps we should have done that before. Or perhaps we should have pressed for that as an important issue before. Maybe it wasn't the biggest thing. There can be a lot of different views on that. The underlying point is, does it matter about the history of Bristol and its slavery past? Yeah, that's an important part of our history, and one we have to be aware of, come to terms with, think about, reflect on carefully. Does it matter about our current injustices? Yes, it does. Does it matter that we have to work through racial inequality? Of course it does. These things are important issues for the cohesion of a city and for its narrative, for its story, for its understanding of the city itself. Plus, there's obviously, for Christians, there's an important issue about how we treat people, how we see people, how we understand people's role in society, and whether they're treated with justice and fairness. All those things are inherently true for me as a Christian, and they're inherently important for Bristolians. I think it's the how which is always the biggest one. The how is the way in which we go about it, the way in which we work at it. And so for me, I feel like there's a very, very key point is we need to understand the process of redemption, and we need to understand the process of reconciliation. Um, and that will bring change. And so we have to talk about difficult areas. We have to talk about difficult areas like, how policing might happen. We have to talk about difficult areas, like how do we work through the way people are treated in church or in society at large. But these things will come about ultimately by people being able to sit down and talk face to face and be able to work through those things. And if those just come in a very adversarial way, in a very accusative way, in a very confrontational way only, without grace, without relationship, what will probably happen is we'll just have lots of conflict. It's not necessarily true that we will achieve lots, and it doesn't mean that we don't have space to express, but it does mean that in order to get a shared view, and therefore to make good decisions together, we have to have a place where we can try and seek to understand each other, and try and work through the relational part of that. And there's a redemptive aspect too. So in order for change to happen, redemption is a key thing. What do I mean by redemption? It means that that we have the process by which we can change. Okay, so as individuals, I believe as a Christian that redemption is the power of, of God's ability to enable us to change. So I think a lot about John Newton, a slave trader, a really abhorrent man. I mean, just, lots of accounts, the kind of person that epitomized the evils of the slave trade. What was the way forward for him? Well, it was a eureka moment. It was that epiphany of crying out to God, and that beginning to change him as a person, and therefore he ended up being a tremendous help to William Wilberforce in the evidencing of the slave trade as it was, in working through it, and also we know he's accredited to be somebody who was, uh, if not the only hymn writer, certainly the main hymn writer for Amazing Grace. That's what we understand. So Amazing Grace, a song that's gone and the world, because it explains the grace of God to change people. And that's ultimately what if we don't have that as the goal, what we do is we believe that change happens by force. And there's some underlying issues which I probably won't go here on here into more detail, but change by force becomes a very different nature. Okay, change by force means we require power to implement that change and to enable that change to happen. And we can be in the situation that we're enforcing change without consent, or without people being on board with us. And the difficulty is that requires power over people's lives to make that happen. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have willing people. So there are times when obviously implementation of that is helpful, but we end up with a situation that we've often been talking about a lot recently, haven't we? In lockdown, is we've got to be really willing to work with the government, not against them. And if we think the government is wrong, we'll probably not work with them. And if we think they're right, we probably will work with them. But we work in a democracy situation where we believe consent is critical. So that's a key factor for us as well, because we believe that the democratic system is the one that we've found ourselves in. We prefer that. If you want to have a dictatorship, if you want very top-down type of leadership, then you have to go with the downsides of that and what that means. And we see that in many places in the world, and we see that in many times in history. It's a very different style of rule, and it's very different rather than by consent and by agreement. So that's my thoughts anyway. I'm not saying democracy has got it all right. Sometimes it gets it wrong. But that's the system that we're in at the moment. And for me, I find that a little bit easier to work with than dictatorship, to be really honest with you. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. Those are my thoughts. All right, have a good day.